Hey, this is a part 2 to a video I did a couple months ago where I talk about Pokemon's worrying art style changes and some of the common complaints that are made about said art style and direction. If you want an idea of where this video is going, then I suggest you go check out that video just so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. So there were two things that were brought up when I last talked about Pokemon designs. The first was that people thought that me having an art degree is the same as me saying that my opinion was better than everyone else's, when I said no such thing. My opinion isn't better than anyone else's. The only thing I'm saying is that I can explain my opinion in a more technical matter and to give you guys an idea of where I stand with this topic. I'm not saying I'm an expert, I'm just saying I got experience. The internet's the one place where you can say, I like waffles, and someone will say, you dare to be a pancake supremacist! Ugh, I'm getting too old for this.
Did you girls just mistake me for a corpse?
The second was that people told me that I misunderstood why people disliked more humanistic designs, especially for the starters. This is something that I really dislike about online debates, because not only did I see people actually make arguments that I discussed in popular videos and Reddit posts, but just because I disagree with the reasoning, that doesn't mean I don't understand it. And that's why this video exists. I want to talk more about the designs of human-like Pokemon and expand on that, especially why there is dislike for this type of Pokemon. I will say that I disagree with the opinion, and just because I don't list every reason why someone may dislike a human-like Pokemon, that doesn't automatically mean I don't understand the reasoning. There are countless reasons for why someone may dislike a Pokemon design, because that's how subjectivity works. You could dislike Incineroar standing on two legs and having big meaty claws, so because you're too self-conscious that a cat has better physique than you could ever have. Anyway, before we begin, we need to define the terms so people can understand what exactly I'm referring to when I say humanoid Pokemon. A lot of Pokemon have traits that are seen in humans, such as having similar eye structure and design or having the ability to walk on two legs. However, the most common factor is when the Pokemon has more human traits than animalistic. Such examples include Pokemon such as Delphox, Incineroar, or Inteleon. On the flip side, Pokemon such as Sceptile, Blastoise, or Empoleon, while they have traits such as being able to stand on their hind legs and have more humanistic characteristics, are not seen as humanoid. Now that we have a rather rough basis for our thoughts, let's talk about the reasons that I want to cover.
This world is widely inhabited by mysterious and sexy creatures called Pokemon.
One of the most common reasons I see why these Pokemon designs aren't liked is that they break the mold of what a Pokemon is. Essentially, a pocket monster. A lot of people will conflate that to mean that Pokemon should be more animalistic as opposed to being humanoid, especially when it comes to the starters. If I can be a little honest, I'm kinda getting tired of hearing all the rhetoric of how these Pokemon shouldn't be allowed to stand. But to get back to the reasoning, it's due to them becoming too archetypal, too human as it were. In my research, I'd often find people saying that Pokemon are meant to be monsters or animals, and that humanoid part of Pokemon overshadows the animal portion of a Pokemon like Cinderace, who seem to be more of a soccer player than an animal. For some people, when they believe this, it's understandable. This could be attributed to something called the Uncanny Valley. It's a hypothesized relation of how something looks like a human being and how the emotional response to said something. Basically, human-like items, or designs in this case, but have imperfect resemblance to humans will cause strange feelings of uneasiness, or in some cases, revulsion. It's why when you see robots like this, it just looks kinda weird. Or if you want an example that's related to games, Mass Effect Andromeda!
What happened?
You were clinically dead for 22 seconds.
5 years later, and it's still fun to make fun of that face in fucking game. One of the biggest things that Pokemon had going on for it in its earliest days that you were going out to do animal research. That you were discovering all these weird and mysterious creatures, capturing them, and even using them as pets to fight other people's pets. Fundamentally, the idea was that anthropomorphic aspects take over the animalistic traits of the design and can and will make some people uncomfortable or apply to their specific distastes. Fundamentally, the idea is that anthropomorphic aspects will take over the animalistic traits of the design, and can and have made some people uncomfortable or will apply to their specific distastes.
I am very uncomfortable.
And it's here to give another definition just so you guys can understand. On the internet, a lot of people will take that anthropomorphic will automatically understand to human or animal hybrid design, when this is not true. Anthropomorphic's true definition is when something, not just an animal, but also items, are given more human attributes. With this, almost every Pokemon has anthropomorphic traits to them. For example, Trevenant, a ghostly tree Pokemon, is an excellent example of this with the face, the limbs, and even the slight body structure that holds the faintest human design. But ultimately, it's still just a haunted tree. Even Pokemon, such as the original starters, have anthropomorphic aspects to them, whether it be Bulbasaur's eyes resembling that of the human characters in the game's eyes, or Charmander and Squirtle standing up. If you want another starter example, look towards Greninja. This frog ninja, and at one time one of the most popular Pokemon by popular vote, is often considered to be an outlier from a lot of complaints about humanistic Pokemon. Now, why is that? because despite its figure holding onto more humanistic traits, it's still got frog to it. This can be attributed to things such as Greninja's posing, the thin body type, or even the fact that the frog features still overshadow the anthropomorphic aspects, most notably the tongue being used as a scarf. It doesn't hurt that frogs can also have a bit of a similar body structure to that of humans, so it's not unbelievable to see a frog-like creature like this, albeit a bit more stylized. Now, let's look at a more controversial Pokemon, Inteleon. One of the biggest issues I've seen with this design is the proportions. Inteleon's lanky limbs, his big hands, and how some people even said it looks like a suit. There's also how it's more spy than chameleon. I talk about all of this because it leads to one of the biggest complaints about designs, and hell, even Pokemon in general, considering all things that have happened in the last few years. Immersion. This is a word I've come to really dislike. That isn't to say that immersion isn't important, but because it's extremely a subjective term that people will throw around as an objective one, and will even use that to proclaim that the design that they don't like is terrible, or that none of the starters should ever be humanoid-like to their design. And yes, that is a very, very, very abridged opinion that I've seen on a video that has well over 200k views to it. A lot of people will say that Pokemon should just be like pets, that they should be animalistic. The idea of walking in a forest with your pet Vulpix is a thing that a lot of people would like to do and have it become a reality. I can't fault people for that. What I can fault them on is being annoying as all hell whenever they see a starter Pokemon get the potential of being on 2 legs, or how some people proclaim that a design is fixed simply because someone drew these Pokemon on all 4s. It's fine if you dislike a design, but to proclaim that some designs that you don't like are terrible isn't really adding to the conversation. And I'm gonna say this. A lot of the complaints about humanoid Pokemon remind me of the arguments for item Pokemon. If I can go a little more simple, from what I've seen, people see the game's monsters as animals of various types, but at the heart of the matter, they're still animals. Dogs, frogs, birds, etc. And you're off to beat the 8 gym leaders, the local gangsters, and defeat the head honchos of the region, all with your pets. But if you throw in an ice cream cone, a fox that stands on 2 legs, or even a pile of garbage, then people seem to have the same complaints about it. There's a fantasy of wanting to go out and catalog each and every one of these fantastical creatures, so these sorts of Pokemon have the potential to break said immersion because they aren't animalistic. While I understand it, that doesn't mean I agree with it. I mean, I already told you this. Maybe it's because I played a ton of other monster catcher games, maybe it's my age showing, maybe I've grown up on things like Tokusatsu that have a lot of monsters that were man-shaped because of the suits. Or maybe I just don't care, but I believe that monsters can be anything the imagination can think of. Cute, gross, scary, badass, mechanical, and even human-like. I just don't see the reason to limit yourself when it comes to monster designing, as there are countless possibilities. Why limit yourself to just animals? Still, immersion is something that a lot of players and people find important, and I can't fault them on that. I will say that immersion will be dependent on the person, and saying that something is immersion breaking isn't necessarily enough to convince me that it's a good reason without a good explanation to follow it up.
As is tradition, when a young man reaches maturity, he goes out into the world to expand his horizons and experiment with the help of his first Pokemon.
I talked about this as the main talking point in my original video, but I think the fact that Pokemon's art style is changing over its lifetime is a small contributing factor as well. Let's compare 4 of the fire starters to make my point. Charizard, Blaziken, Delphox, and Cinderace. If we look towards the earlier designs, we can see that the anatomy is a bit more conservative. The 2 heads are smaller than their torsos, with their arms aren't as muscular, but still have more definition to them, as well as their legs too. Now we'll look towards Delphox and Cinderace. Their heads are considerably larger than their torsos, they have a lot more smooth features, and their limbs are a bit less definitive. While there's more details added to the designs, they're still simplified. It's why you'll get the comment, over-designed and still oversimplified. A statement that should sound like an oxymoron, but when explained makes a lot more sense. I don't disagree that the art style has changed, nor do I disagree that people dislike this change. I can't say I'm too much of a fan of the more cartoony style myself, but I do have a bit of an issue with simplicity becoming a bit too common in media nowadays. Granted, when it comes to animation and such, the simpler the design, the easier it is to animate, and a lot less details to worry about. Now, I'm going to talk about personality too, because the art style stuff I already talked about in length in my first video, and the same with personality, so they'll be combined into one section. I think the best way to boil down this aspect is that people see this as putting the personality of the Pokemon over the actual creature aspect. Pokemon, as of late, have been prioritizing character design over creature design, making sure the Pokemon in question's themes and inspiration take front stage. Let's spice things up and talk about Incineroar. Its inspiration is more or less of a heeled masked wrestler, more specifically the wrestler known as Tiger Mask, and there's also the cartoonish design with exaggerated features.
Big, meaty claws! paws!
However, a lot of people have expressed that the personality and even the job of the Pokemon has been assigned, aka Incineroar being a wrestler, Inteleon as a spy, Incineroar as a soccer player, yada yada yada, overshadow the Pokemon itself. Again, this goes back to preferences, immersion, and what people could consider to break that is a thin line between reality and fantasy. Granted, we come to the rub of subjectivity. A lot of people will want to impose a personality on their Pokemon, and if the Pokemon's initial personality is stronger than what they're expecting, then it makes it harder for players to connect with. We should take into account non-starter Pokemon. Take for example the Machamp line, the Lucario line, the Jinx line, the Alakazam line, or the Hitmon line. All of these Pokemon are humanoid, but most people don't complain about them. Why is that? Well, if you consider it, these lines are all fighting and psychic types, types that denote a more physical apt combatant or a more evolved intelligent creature. These Pokemon tend to be more acceptable in that manner. We also consider that these lines are not starter Pokemon, they're more optional. Well, your starter is optional, but there has been a bit of a push in Pokemon games as of late to connect with your starter. I point to things such as when your starter comes out of your Pokeball in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, or how Leon takes the starter that you didn't pick. The games are actively trying to make you feel more of a connection to these creatures, and if you're not on board with the more human-like designs, then that's going to annoy you. Granted, there are exceptions to these rules, such as Delphox being part psychic, or how people continuously complained about the fire-fighting starters again and again and again!
It's important that both of you should feel comfortable with each other, so no matter what changes or evolution either of you undergo, you will always have a foundation of trust and friendship.
At the end of the day, there could be countless reasons for why people dislike these Pokemon, and hey, it's perfectly fine to dislike or like any design for any reason. The only time that I get tired of that is when I see so many people complain about this, and then they act like they're in the minority of the Pokemon fan base. If you keep flaunting that you dislike the designs, and you do it in a very annoying manner, you're not really going to get a lot of positive reception in that regard. Then again, the same can be said about people being positive about designs too. Like, unless you're someone who's like me, who's got some level of courage and blood alcohol level, if you just keep your outward thoughts to, I don't like this, or I like this, most people are going to just leave you alone. It's when you explain that you open yourself up to debate. And I'll say this again, I understand why people dislike humanoid designs. You just finished watching a video where I talk about some of the more apt reasons that I've seen online. I just happen to disagree with those reasons, and if you disagree with me, that's fine. Now, if you excuse me, I'm gonna go back to my cave, relax, and finally listen to my thoughts. Why did I think this video was a good idea? Did I leave my car lights on? Will you die alone? And this is why I play video games.